One of the stories in your book is about a man who came ashore, I think it was on Omaha Beach, and wept for about an hour.
He got behind one of the obstacles, and he was so shaken by his buddies being killed to his left and his right and all of this chaos going on around him, and he got behind an obstacle and he cried. He said it seemed like forever. One of his buddies I interviewed said it was about a half an hour, and then he pulled himself to, and he got up and he did his duty, and he got up on top of this bluff. And he told me in the interview, he said, you know, Steve, I have never been able to cry since. I've been through a lot of tragedies in my life. I have never been able to cry since that morning.
You know, the other thing that strikes me as well, Steve, is that so many of these veterans who are coming back with their families are now beginning to tell stories that not even their families have heard. They have stored them away in their minds, and only now can they tell them to you and to members of their family and to us as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As they get older, they realize that they're going to tell those stories now, or they're going to go to the grave with them. And they want to get it out, and they want to speak most of all about their buddies and their comrades and what they did and how they managed to take this bluff and win the battle.
Why do you think they repressed it for so long? They just needed to in order to get on with their lives. Just too painful.
You know, I think we ought to talk for at least a second about what a wounded man looks like. What happens when somebody has his jaw shot off? What happens when you see a man who is carrying his left arm with his right hand? What happens when you see a man who has been gut shot? When we talk about war, we don't get into that anywhere near often enough. It is just a sight that you have to suppress the memory of it. I mean, you just can't live with it. You know, in the movies, bang, and you're dead. And it's all very clean and very nice. It doesn't happen that way in life. You lose a foot, you lose a leg, you lose an arm, you have your cheek shot off, you have an eye shot out, and you live. And you go on. And you got to help these guys that are wounded. And those are the memories that come back most often when they talk about Omaha Beach or any other combat in World War II. And that's why they don't want to think about it.
Professor Ambrose, did Omaha have to be as bloody as it was? I know Eisenhower chose the decision of taking the risk of casualties. He chose the element of surprise, that if he'd have bombed longer, it would have lessened the element of surprise. But did it have to be as bad as it was? Could other things have been done to lessen it? And still succeed?
In retrospect, if they'd have dropped one of the airborne divisions right behind this beach, you probably could have cut down the casualties by 50%, maybe even more. But if you had done that, you wouldn't have had them behind Utah Beach, and so the 4th Division would have taken the casualties. They hated the idea of having to attack this beach. It's an ideal defensive position. Hemmed in, very narrow beach, the bluff looking right down on it, guns firing enfilade right down the beach. But it had to be taken because the gap otherwise between Utah over here to our right and the British beaches over to the left would have been almost 50 kilometers. And that would have meant the Germans could have attacked in detail over to the left and in detail over to the right and overwhelmed the invasion. So this beach had to be taken, and they just had to suck it up and do it.
Some people say that the bombing runs should have been made hours before the actual invasion rather than just a half hour before. Do you think that would have made a difference?
Well, both the bombing runs and the naval bombardment. And in the Pacific, these naval bombardments would take 3 or 4 days before they'd go ashore. And here it was only a half an hour. And there's been a lot of criticism of that, but what people forget is that in the Pacific, these islands were cut off by the Navy. The Japanese couldn't reinforce. If you'd have started bombarding this coast 3 or 4 days before, the Germans have got rail transport. I mean, a lot of it had been shot out, but a lot of it was still there. And the Germans would have known that this is the site of the attack, and their ability to reinforce was very much greater than Eisenhower's, because they're coming by land, and he's got to come across from the channel.
So the element of surprise was the overriding factor.
Oh, absolutely. Without surprise, this invasion never would have worked.
But you've looked at this so many different ways and for such a long period of time, but aren't you still astonished that there was the element of surprise, that they were able to pull off an invasion of that magnitude and catch the Germans essentially unawares?
Yes and no. Yes, it is almost inexplicable. How could the largest invasion force in history set sail from England and no one in Germany knew it? But the preparation was so intricate. They knocked out certain radar stations and left others intact. And the ones they left intact, they dropped that foil that would show up on the screen as if it were a fleet coming in. You were talking earlier about the intricacies of the Fortitude plan. They made those Germans look north into Norway and to look even more to the Pas-de-Calais for the invasion. And the delicacy of this, one slip, and this is thousands of messages that are involved. One slip.
It was brilliant in Norway. I know, Steve, they put in ads in the paper or notices marriages and things like that. So to lead Hitler to believe that the British were there and were about to invade.
And then they kept him up there. Rommel was screaming for reinforcements, bring him down from Norway, and messages were sent out that indicated, this was on the 6th and 7th of June, that the invasion here at Omaha was a feint, that there was going to be a follow-up in Norway, and then at the Pas-de-Calais, 175,000 German troops in Norway that were scheduled to be brought down here, and one message from one agent, his code name was Garbo, and Hitler stopped that movement.
You know, while the Allied forces deserve an awful lot of credit, I think it would not have gone nearly as well as planned if the Germans hadn't made so many mistakes and really hadn't been basically asleep at the wheel.
Well, their command structure was just hopeless. For example, the coastal guns over here were under naval control until the first landing craft came ashore, and then at that point they came under Army control. Now, this is just madness to try and run an army like this. You had the terrible split between Rundstedt and Rommel. Who's in command? A German tank commander here in Normandy on June 6, 1944, didn't know who to look to for orders. Was it Rommel, was it Rundstedt, or was it Hitler? He couldn't move until Hitler gave the word, and Hitler slept until noon.
Wasn't there a case also of a German tank commander going to an artillery officer and having to pull a gun on him to get him to retrain his guns toward an advancing column?
He had that artillery officer had those marvelous 88s, and he was shooting up the planes, and British tanks were coming along on the ground. This is Colonel Hans von Luck, and he said to the lieutenant to press those guns and shoot those tanks. The lieutenant said, go to hell, I'm in the artillery.
Stephen, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because I'm told that Queen Elizabeth II is arriving for the ceremony, and as she pulls up and joins the other dignitaries, I think our list of official heads of state is complete, and as soon as Her Majesty gets out of the car and is greeted in the receiving line, we're going to avail ourselves of the opportunity to take a station break, and then we'll come on back and we'll catch up on all the live ceremonies with much more ahead from Normandy. But first we'll take a break right here. This is Today on NBC.
Still battling the bulge? No need anymore.
Become a Peppy on your very own personalized eating plan.
I've had a weight problem all my life. I've tried every gimmick and every diet plan on the market, always with the same result. I lose a few, I gain double back. I've now been a Peppy for over a year, and I've lost 140 pounds. As you can see, I'm a big guy. I can't live on celery sticks. But on the PEP plan, I eat everything that I like.
Say goodbye to diet.
Call and discover the PEP plan. No obligation.
Attention accident victims. If you've been hurt in an accident, call the tough, smart lawyers Berger and Green, 1-800-999-2626. If you have a broken bone, scar, burn, or any other serious injury, call Berger and Green, 1-800-999-2626. Berger and Green has collected millions of dollars for thousands of accident victims. Call 1-800-999-2626 now. The appointment's free and there's no fee unless you win. Berger and Green, 1-800-999-2626.
How do I feed my hungry family? With home-style hamburger helper.
Try our Salisbury with home-cooked pasta in a rich, hearty sauce. Home-style hamburger helper.
To soothe athlete's foot, Desinex does it. But to cure athlete's foot, Desinex does it. Only Desinex has UDA to both soothe the discomfort and kill the fungus. To soothe and cure, Desinex does it all.
Whoa! Forgive me if I stop and stare, but Giant Eagle's got a drugstore right down there.
It's the exact prescriptions my family needs.
So the pharmacist checked his computer and found out that Andrea had an allergy to penicillin.
I gave them my prescription, did all my shopping, came back, it was ready. And what a low price.
Giant Eagle, so simple for you.
I go out of my way to find a pharmacist that's good.
The night you don't have to.
As we come back, have to issue an apology. How silly of me. I had said that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the last to arrive. We should have known it would be our host. President Francois Mitterrand of France is we believe, the last to arrive.
Oh, I can assure you they're in charge. And this is what he likes to do. He likes to have everyone get there, and then he comes, and he'll spend some time making sure that he gets plenty of what we call in our business FaceTime on camera.
Officials in both Germany and Russia are a little bit miffed that they weren't invited to participate in the official ceremonies, but
it was, we are told, a French decision that the Allies were alerted of it and had the chance to discuss it, but that it was a French decision to not invite them. Is that what you've been hearing, Professor Ambrose?
That is very much my understanding, and if I may say so, I'm very disappointed.
Why?
At the French. Because the Germans were liberated as well as the French were. This was a victory of democracy. This wasn't a victory of Britain and the United States over Germany. Germany has been our democratic ally for 45 years. And I think it's time to let bygones be bygones.
I thought at least Helmut Kohl would be invited here to give a speech.
Yes.
And to talk about the future rather than the past, but he has been invited to Paris on Bastille Day.
Yes.
Is my understanding.
We've got a lot going on. You're looking inside there where we have the assembled heads of state, and just offshore we have a 21-gun salute from part of the large fleet that has been assembled here. A cruiser going by.
We're also getting a flyover, Tom.
Vintage aircraft, some of them.
Professor Ambrose, I'm going to lean on you to try to identify them for us if you could.
I can't see them well enough from here.
That's a B-26
Marauder over there.
Yeah, right.
That's a modern helicopter there. That looks like a B-17 to me, but I can't see it that well out there.
B-26 was known as the flying coffin. They were used in those days. There was a time when I was in the 5th grade when I could identify them and draw them all.
Very impressive.
And I do believe that's a Mustang off the wing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. They were really fast. That was a real breakthrough.
Time?
Yeah, they were, but that was a breakthrough. You know what they could do.
Mm-hmm. 2 Mustangs.
As we see these verdant fields of Normandy now, I've been thinking a lot about what it must have been like 50 years ago with the fog of combat, the enormous chaos, both off the beach and on the beach. And it's just difficult to imagine that that went on in our lifetime.
Yes, it is. They're a bit different today, by the way, because the French after the war got tractors, and so to justify the expense, they had to make their fields bigger. So more than half the hedgerows have been knocked down.
Hang on, Professor, because right now they are raising the flags of the Allied nations, those represented at the ceremony this afternoon.
Attention pour les couleurs. Envoyez.
The French do ceremony very well.
Our schedule calls for some greetings, and this is a tape of Eisenhower's orders.
In a moment, you will hear the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His statement will be followed by other messages to the peoples of the countries on the western coast of Europe, which are occupied by the enemy.
Missionary force. This landing is part of the concerted United Nations plan for the liberation of Europe, made in conjunction with our great Russian allies. I have this message for all of you. Although the initial assault may not have been made in your own country, the hour of your liberation is approaching. All patriots, men and women, young and old, have a part to play in the achievement of final victory.
6 juin 1944, le général de Gaulle. La bataille suprême est engagée.
Obviously, what you're hearing is the message that the tape messages that the invasion was underway as they were broadcast by each of the leaders of the Allied nations. You heard Dwight David Eisenhower's now famous message first, and now General de Gaulle's is going on. This is going on right down the beach from us, a good mile and a half or so maybe. And we've had a replication of the amphibious assault on a much, much smaller scale.
Much smaller scale. Modern craft that they were using. Those are modern craft.
When you talk
the ones that came across, that looks like a Higgins boat to me right there.
Well, speaking of Higgins, Andrew Jackson Higgins, you are a huge fan of his, as was President General Eisenhower at the time.
General Eisenhower said he's the man who won the war for us. He said that if Andy Higgins hadn't designed and built those landing craft, we never could have gone in over an open beach. I don't know how we ever could have gotten back into Europe.
Built them in New Orleans?
He built them in New Orleans. He built 20,000 of them in New Orleans in 1942 and in 1943, expanding from a little tiny shipyard that had been making small craft for this exploration of the swamps of Louisiana. We're building the National D-Day Museum at the site where Andy Higgins tested these boats, and then adjacent to the site where he built them.
On Lake Pontchartrain?
On Lake Pontchartrain, right across from the University of New Orleans.
Because right now he is an unsung hero.
Unknown, completely unknown.
Talk as well about the reconnaissance that had occurred on these beaches before the invasion took place. Those were some of the most, I think, individual heroic maneuvers that were made. These frog...
Just amazing. They came across in midget submarines. They would anchor offshore. They would come in at a low tide and get in with tubes that they could take a sample of the sand to take it back to England to see if that sand would support the weight of the tank. They came in to examine the beach defenses. Sometimes they came in fishing trawlers and they would anchor offshore.
Let me just kind of step in here, Professor Ambrose, to explain what we are seeing. These gentlemen, some of them were brought ashore on these amphibious vehicles, and they are right now coming ashore with the colors of the units that landed on the Normandy beaches on 6 June 44. And they're going to then take up their positions behind the heads of state in an honor position. And the color bearers are being led by an American veteran, we understand.
Professor Ambrose, how did they decide? How did ICE decide which units went where?
Well, he wanted a mix of experienced and green troops. Green in the sense they'd not been in combat. Their training had been extensive. As one of the Rangers put it to me once, an experienced infantryman is a terrified infantryman. And they wanted to have the bulk of the troops going ashore on D-Day, men who had never been in combat before. And so they were. The 4th Infantry had not been, the 29th had not been, the 101st had not been. The 1st Division that landed here was a mix of about half combat veterans from Sicily and North Africa, and the other half were replacements. But that was the mix that Eisenhower, he wanted a little experience in there, but he wanted a lot of young men who felt, it can't happen to me. I'm too good looking. I'm too young. I'm too important.
As Tom mentioned earlier, that attitude changed in about 3 days.
Yeah, well, sometimes in about 30 seconds.
Right.
It changed. That's right.
We are hearing the planes overhead. The next order of business, according to the schedule, is a skydiving exhibition. Parachutists from each of the 9 nations that came ashore on D-Day will be a part of it, but we hear the planes, we don't see them.
Speaking of paratroopers, did you all witness, obviously, the jump made yesterday with, 38 veterans ranging from age to their late 60s to early 80s. One was
the oldest was 83 years old, that's right.
They asked Congressman Gibbons, are you going to jump again? And he said, hell no, I stopped jumping when they stopped paying me.
You know, it's interesting that the paratroopers who came in on the gliders didn't get the extra $50 for jumping.
Not until September, that's right. And the glider-born men didn't get that extra hazard duty pay. And they were very angry about that.
I would be too.
Most of those guys carried, what, a $10,000 life insurance policy?
This is a $10,000 jump that you're making tonight. One guy on this beach, Frank.
Professor, let me interrupt you because the D-Day veteran is starting our ceremonies down below.
Our lives. We prepared for D-Day in England. I was not new to battle, having survived the North Africa and Sicily invasion, where my brother and I had fought side by side. Still, I remember my amazement when we came into Southampton area prior to our embarkation. Rows and rows of tanks, artillery guns, trucks, jeeps, armored personnel vehicles, and warehouses of logistical supplies lined England's lush fields. The harbors were so filled with boats that we could have walked their length, stepping from craft to craft. I suddenly appreciated the United States support of the war effort. We were the men on the front line, but the hard work of our mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers still at home made this tremendous military operation feasible. We came on our feet, but we brought their hearts and prayers with us. A final battalion briefing readied us for the invasion. My brother and I had been assigned to different companies, and as the briefing ended, we waved to each other. We would make the landing on separate ships. What was it like on D-Day? 2 days later, when the ship I was on pulled out, we certainly were not alone. There were ships in front of us and to each side of us for as far as we could see. By the time we were partway across, the ships behind us seemed not to end. We looked skyward, where planes from horizon to horizon headed toward Europe. When we got near the beaches, battleships and cruisers were firing towards shore. We could hear bombs exploding in the distance. There was such firepower from the ships and planes that we didn't expect much resistance on the beach. I believe a lot of us wondered how anyone on shore could survive the onslaught of the massive firepower. What was it like on D-Day? My platoon boarded an assault craft to approach the beach. Luckily for us, the Germans were concentrating their firepower on the larger landing craft. When we hit a sandbar, the ramp went down, and as soon as we left the boat, we were in water up to our armpits. For some shorter personnel, it was deeper. We waited and scrambled towards shore. What was it like on D-Day? We found men pinned down on the beach, many wounded or killed, and many terrified, all surrounded by ruined and swamped landing craft. The dead and wounded soldiers, the wreckage, the ability of the enemy to cause so much damage made us realize that this war was far from over, with its noise of mines detonating bombs, airplanes, continuous roar, mortar and artillery shells bursting on the beach, rifle and machine gun fire ripping holes in the sand and splashing in the water. This war was far from over. However, D-Day turned the tide. Sadly, it was the end of the war for a great many brave men who died here that day. But it was also the beginning of the end of the war for Hitler. The world changed on June the 6th, 1944, the day the good guys took charge again. It did not mean peace, but it marked the stand for freedoms that would continue through the Korean War, the Vietnam conflict, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the Allied containment of Iraq.
They obviously have started the skydiving display, and you can see the French precision flying team moving into position over the beach here at Omaha.
It put new hope into the battle-weary.
That was the B-17 that we saw earlier. I think we may have identified it as a B-26. It's gotten a little cobwebby in. Huh?
They were both.
They were both. Okay, well, that makes me feel better, Stephen.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And to rescue his prisoners, we fought for much more than that. We fought to preserve what our forefathers had died for. We picked up our guns to protect our faith, to preserve our liberty.
French Mirage jets flying precision flyovers. That tells you a little bit about how the
Our purpose went well beyond
air wars have changed in 50 years. Stephen Ambrose, it has always been quite remarkable to me that the Germans had so few fighter planes, and France had a great Air Force after all. Close air support would have been very important to them that day.
But they had been driven back inside Germany by the strategic bombing campaign, Operation Point Blank, and that continuous bombing of German cities had forced the Luftwaffe onto the defensive. They had to pull back inside Germany, so there were about 100 sorties flown, but there were 11,000 Allied sorties, so there was virtually no German Air Force here at all.
Plus which the Luftwaffe had suffered ever-increasing losses as the years had gone on, and by 44 was pretty well decimated.
Well, they had plenty of planes. They were very short on fuel, and they were short on pilots. They were still making planes, but they kept their pilots in the air. The United States would bring pilots back home to train the next, I shouldn't say generation, but the next bunch of flyers who are going to go home. The Germans had lost most of their experienced pilots, and then they had terrible fuel shortages because of the strategic bombing campaign.
All right, we're going to come on back in just a moment. We got much more ahead from Normandy. Coming up on 9:33, we're going to take a commercial break right here. We're back after this.
This is the last straw. In case you missed the symbolism, TGI Fridays has me in a garden to remind you of their garden fresh salads, like Cajun fried chicken salad, fresh greens piled high with crisp and spicy Cajun chicken, or Cobb salad, turkey, bacon, and avocado heaped over fresh tossed greens. If my agent only had a brain.
Everyone look forward to Friday.
Excuse me. Could you take a picture of us with photo over there?
If you take off to the Italian town of Todi, but your camera just takes off,
where'd they go?
You better have Visa Gold, because there's not a camera store there that takes American Express.
There's a great shot.
Visa Gold, it's everywhere you want to be.
Roses, I want roses. That's it. One stinking lousy bug-eating rose.
Orthosystemic rose and flower care can help.
Oh, yeah?
It fertilizes and protects against bugs. 2 jobs in 1 simple step.
That's all it takes?
That's all it takes. Ortho Rose Care. 1 step to gorgeous roses.
Ah, yes. 1 step. Did I mention I love roses?
Ortho. You're working too hard without us.
Going to Hawaii. Why did I buy a bikini? Wonder what I'd look like sitting. When you're trying for a certain look, putting on suntan lotion, walking. Help get that look by including Kellogg's Special K. Great toasted taste, 110 calories, and fat-free. Oh, bikini. Yeah, I'd say that rhymes with a low cost. Kellogg's Special K. Great taste never looks so good.
Your local True Value features professionals who can help solve your problems. Unlike those huge hardware warehouses where you sometimes find a less experienced staff. Get Lasco's 12-inch 3-speed fan for just $12.97 and Allenite's 53-piece toolkit for only $11.44 at True Value. True Value. Help is just around the corner.
Chocolate mocha supreme, dark chocolate fudge. What an indulgent way to lose 8 pounds with Nestle Sweet Success, the only diet that starts with Nestle and ends with sweet success.
Hi, my name is Brandy Goodish, and I'm Miss Blossom Time for 1994. We're on a tour through Michiana, and we all stopped to say, hi, Brian. Hi, Katie. We all know what a difference an egg makes in Southwest Michigan.
Je n'oublierai jamais cette minute.
As the ceremony proceeds down on the beach, let us tell you that what we're involved in right here is the international ceremony. And so following this, there will be a parade of the units that will pass in review, and President Francois Mitterrand will be the only one of the heads of state to speak. And following that, there'll be a number of photo opportunities, and then this affair will break up, and some of the honored guests will move up here for what is the U.S. national ceremony here at the cemetery at Omaha Beach.
Tom, and you were here for the 40th anniversary, and in many ways, President Reagan really did set the standard for moving D-Day speeches, didn't he?
The boys of Pont de Hoc, he talked about them. And it was an enormously emotional time. I talked to young David Eisenhower. I guess he's not as young as David Eisenhower yesterday, and he said, you know, I listened to that speech, and he said, for just a moment, I wondered who had commanded D-Day, whether it was Ronald Reagan or my grandfather.
He spent the war making movies.
He said it was that evocative and that moving. He said, in fact, I was a little jealous of it. But it was a terribly evocative speech, beautifully delivered, with the Rangers sitting there in front of him. And I think that, you know, in fact, we owe a debt to Ronald Reagan for the way that he did it, because it did, in a way, crystallize a lot of our feelings about that time. Peggy Noonan wrote that speech.
I was going to say you should mention the speechwriter.
Yes,
She
Peggy
deserves
Noonan
an
wrote
awful
the
lot of
speech.
credit, doesn't she?
Let me ask you, if we do not learn the lessons of history, as we are always reminded, we are condemned to repeat them. What do we learn from D-Day, the lessons of this history?
Stick with democracy. The democracies will always beat the totalitarians. The overwhelming lesson of this day is Hitler believed the Nazi youth would always beat the Boy Scouts. And Hitler was wrong. Hitler believed that German industry, with that ruthless efficiency and that Führer principle of one leader, one country, would always beat any country that allowed an opposition political party to exist. And he lost that bet, too. The United States just pulled off miracles in production.
Let me go back down to the ceremony, if I could, Professor Ambrose, because I think we're going to get the parade of units passing in review.
As we watch this, one of the things that we should be aware of is that in just 4 years, the United States military went from a force of 458,000 men to 11,451,000. And that's where Hitler underestimated the will of the United States and of the Allies to do what was necessary, and that's reflected here 50 years later in these ceremonies. This is the last post ceremony. It's a tribute to the departed.
Dans quelques instants, on va commencer le
Since that sound is a little muffled, it's very difficult for us to tell exactly what is transpiring right now. We can tell you we are not in control of the pictures that are coming from that ceremony. These are pool pictures, and we're sharing in them, and we are seeing them just as you are right now. That's obviously a French honor guard that is leading the procession, the parade of the colors that will pass in review. And following that, Francois Mitterrand will have some remarks.
And very shortly after this ceremony, the President and Mrs. Clinton and several United States dignitaries and will be coming up here.
We hope shortly after.
To the cemetery.
Knowing the President's schedule, it might be quite a while.
Well, he does have some downtime, and he will be delivering a major speech at this cemetery.
As we watch this, Stephen Ambrose, it's now 3:40 in the afternoon here in Normandy. What was going on this beach 50 years ago at that time, late in the afternoon?
They were getting up. They had now gotten to the top. The infantry companies come down on the ravines from behind, knocked the Germans out of those ravines. The tide was now backed off, so that equipment was coming ashore at a very rapid pace and was getting up the draws just about this time of day for the first time on that day and beginning to move inland here, especially right here through this cemetery, into the village of Colville, with Joe Dawson and Company G of the 116th had pretty well secured by 4 p.m. And then over here to the right, there were also units getting up on top. Nowhere did we reach the D-Day objectives, which were way too optimistic. They were thinking in terms of 10 kilometers inland. We got about a kilometer inland.
Were they thinking in terms of that? John Eisenhower, in an interview earlier, said that they had intentionally left a lot of slack in the battle plan. Is that being kind?
No, the big thing was to get through the Atlantic Wall. Once you're through it, you're through it. They didn't have anything behind it, and that's what happened here. They got through the Atlantic Wall. They didn't make any penetration of any importance beyond the Atlantic Wall. You really had the whole of America's industrial productivity for 2 years coming ashore on this beach. It was in England, it was being loaded up, it was being brought over, and as long as we had a foothold and could expand it and have room to bring all this equipment in, we had the victory.
But the fighting that occurred after D-Day, obviously D-Day's getting the lion's share of attention as it should today, but the fighting went on for weeks. Was it much worse than anticipated, the conditions that the Allied forces
Yes,
faced?
there was a stalemate here for way more than a week. It lasted until the end of July, so it was almost 2 months long. The 4th Infantry Division, which got through D-Day with almost no casualties, less than 100, took terrible losses on D+1 and D+2 and D+3 as it moved towards Cherbourg. The divisions that were coming in, like the 2nd Armored and the 90th and so many others, just took terrible. This was awful fighting in this hedgerow country, and very expensive to the Americans, much more expensive than D-Day.
You might spend a moment or two talking about those hedgerows, Professor Ambrose, because we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the bocage and how difficult it was. That was one of those instances where the resistance actually could have been of great benefit to the Allies, because from the air, the hedgerows looked like nothing but a hedge, a 2-foot hedge. And in point of fact, what they found was the reality slowed them down a great deal once they tried to break out from the beaches.
Well, these hedgerows are as much as 6 feet high at the base. They're almost cement-like, and then trees and shrubs going out of them, some of them 1,000 years old, so the roots make it impossible to blow it even with dynamite almost.
Right, tanks couldn't.
And they were little small fields, not much more than the size of a football field. So you had to fight an individual battle for every one of them. Now, what's inexplicable is how come the Allies didn't see that this was going to be a problem? They took air reconnaissance photos, but they thought these hedgerows were like English hedgerows that the fox hunters jump over.
And those reconnaissance
photos, I've never been able to understand, a lot of Brits traveled over here before the war and vacationed in this part of France, and but no one on the Allied side anticipated this problem.
We want to show you the United States military band now that is now passing in review at these international ceremonies right on Omaha Beach. You know, it's been quite touching to see young servicemen from this generation who are over here as part of these ceremonies talking to the old guys, and they do it with a sense of utter awe.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They can't imagine how they could have accomplished what they did.
And someone was saying to me yesterday that if they tried to climb Point de Hoc today, you'd take 50% casualties even without any opposition. My reply was, not the Rangers. The Rangers would make it up.
In fact, those cliffs weren't that high compared to some of the cliffs they've been training on in
They've
England.
been training on tougher cliffs in England and Scotland, especially, yes.
Well, just before we go away, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. There was a ranger by the name of Ralph Davis. They called him the preacher. He was the coolest guy in the outfit and the best shot, and he got atop the cliffs and relieved himself. And his colleagues said, well, the war's got to stop. Well, the preacher gets organized. We'll be back right after this.
Attention Western Pennsylvania residents under age 65 without group health insurance. Effective immediately, you are eligible to apply for lifetime health care protection of $1 million from Blue Cross of Western Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania Blue Shield. If you qualify, this protection, called Complete Care, can be yours for as little as $80 a month, less than $2.64 a day. For free information, call this toll-free number. Complete Care covers hospitalization, doctor visits for both injury and illness, emergency care, surgery, prescription drugs, maternity care, and more. In addition, most claims are filed automatically, eliminating paperwork on your part. Plus, you choose the deductible that fits your budget, the family members you want protected, and the doctors and hospitals you want to use. Complete Care is backed by Western Pennsylvania's health insurance leader, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. If you're under 65 without group health insurance, see if you qualify for Complete Care, the plan that gives you health care coverage of $1 million for as little as $80 a month. That's as low as $2.64 a day.
Call toll-free 1-800-492-9600 for free information on Complete Care from Blue Cross of Western Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania Blue Shield. That's 1-800-492-9600. There's no obligation. Call now.
The law office of Kenneth P. Walsh with a message about Social Security disability. Many people eligible for disability benefits are initially denied. If you are unable to work because of a physical or a mental condition, you may be eligible regardless of age. Don't give up. File your appeal with experienced legal help. Call attorney Kenneth P. Walsh, 1-800-KP-WALSH, serving Central Pennsylvania for over 18 years. No fee unless you win.
A radio flash at 3:32 a.m. Eastern Time announced to the world that the invasion had begun. From the shores of Normandy to the streets of Berlin to towns and cities all across America, news of D-Day traveled quickly around the globe, and for those old enough to remember, that was a day they would never forget.
People of Western Europe, a landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force. This landing is part of the concerted United Nations plan for the liberation of Europe.
I went to work that morning and I come into the store, and Madame Boissard mentions to me, she motions to me, go in the back, because her husband was in the back. And so I go in the back, and there he was listening to the radio, and he said, Les Américains ont débarqué. Oh, I was just so shocked. And I listened to the radio too, and there I heard Eisenhower. And then we looked at each other, and we couldn't do anything. We realized we were still under German occupation. D-Day was the thing we waited for. It was the thing that held us together, that we hoped for, you know.
I was a medical student in Berlin, and my personal reaction was that I hoped that the Allied would march through very fast, because I did not believe that the Germans had a chance to win the war anymore, and as soon as it was going to be stopped, it would be better. But that was not the general feeling. Some thought we could still fight and win the war. They still believed in Hitler and his ability to turn around.
I was assigned to a British headquarters in St. James Square. The British were elated. They had waited so long for this. The girls cried. My friend came over and she hugged me and she said, I'm so glad it's happening. Maybe this will be the end of this terrible, terrible war. And we all went to chapel. We all prayed. And I don't think I ever prayed so hard in my life than I did for those boys.
War brought much suffering and grief to Soviet people, you see. We needed help. And then we waited We waited with impatience for this long coming news about your invasion in Normandy, and at last it came. Believe me, we were happy. Tears stood in our eyes. You see, we cried. We knew that now an end will be put to our sufferings, to our griefs.
On D-Day, I was in a refugee camp in Switzerland. I had been living for quite a while as a Christian with a Christian family who did not know I was Jewish. I was always frightened. At times I stuttered so badly I couldn't even talk, and at times I was mute with terror. Eventually I was put into a camp, and from that camp I escaped prior to deportation into one of the killing fields. D-Day was not a joyous occasion because of what we had experienced prior to some of us getting into Switzerland, because we were heartsick, because all of us had already a hole in our hearts.
Well, in June of 1944, the Navy was preparing to invade the Marianas. So the fleet was moving north into that area. The ship that I was on, the Bunker Hill, was part of that operation. Well, I first heard the announcement about the invasion in my office on the ship. There was an announcement on the ship's loudspeaker system that the Allied troops had landed in France. Well, we had our own operation to be concerned with. We were engaged every day in fending off Japanese planes. That was our preoccupation. Well, the feeling really was that we had our own battle to fight.
I was born in '39, so as D-Day approached, I was coming into 5 years old, and I just considered it to be something that you played. I didn't understand the enormity of it at all. I had a little helmet and a little gun, and I pretended that I shot Germans and Japanese. We saw newsreels. Mother and I went to some film and saw a newsreel of these 3 guys after D-Day. I think it was 3 men trying to get across a beach at Normandy, and they didn't make it. And they just looked like they were lying down, and Mother was crying. For the first time after D-Day, I understood that those people were actually getting killed, that the soldiers, American soldiers, my father, were actually, the potential was there for them to die.
I was working at a small key and lock shop in the Fishtown area of Philadelphia. And the reason I got that job, I must say, is because of the war. Men were very scarce during that time. And when I got to my job and the announcement came over the loudspeaker, I knew it was for real. I can remember so well, where before there was maybe a feeling of despair or, gee, when will this ever end? It just seemed to lighten everybody's spirit. D-Day meant a lot to me. And I still remember it with almost disbelief that people were so courageous. It was a special day in history, and it should never be forgotten.
And we'll be back with more of this very special edition of Today from Normandy right after these messages.
There's a place near you where the mountain climbers never touch the ground, where the bodies are made of iron and the bikes of titanium alloy. It's Performance Bicycle Shop with over 6,000 square feet of high-tech cycling gear. But if you go, bring a stump-jumping spirit and your Visa card. Because at Performance, they take cycling to the extreme, but they don't take American Express. Visa, it's everywhere you want to be.
Alternative math. What do 1 crust sandwich, 1 order of hash browns, and 1 hot coffee add up to?
$1.99.
At Burger King, just $1.99 every day. We may not be the world's #1 fast food place. It just tastes that way.
Now, from Oral-B comes new anti-plaque rinse. It combines a natural mint flavor with an active ingredient that kills 90% of plaque on contact. Plaque brushing and flossing may miss. New anti-plaque rinse from Oral-B.
You missed all the excitement.
The office?
Yep. Marketing forgot the instruction sheets for the Mr. Squiggly robot.
No. All 50,000?
Mm-hmm. So I'm taking care of it.
That's 50,000 copies by morning.
No problem.
You're going to be working all night.
Well, actually, my staff is working on it, saving us a fortune in overtime.
What staff? When did you get a staff?
Kinko's, your branch office, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I don't have a staff.
Get this. you'd have to eat 5 large shredded wheat biscuits to equal the fiber in just 1 bowl of Kellogg's All-Bran Extra Fiber. Kellogg's All-Bran, first on fiber.
You're not missing a thing. The program is still going on down on the beaches of Omaha. We're going to come back. There's still much more ahead from Normandy right after a station break.
She was a Navy lawyer assigned to stop sexual harassment at sea, but she became a victim instead. You won't believe what happened after that. Jane Pauley, Stone Phillips, Dateline, Tuesday.
Years ago, the world belonged to the dinosaurs.
Within a couple months, he had gone through the Hooked on Phonics, and we could not stop him from reading every book he could get his hands on.
Hooked on Phonics answered 2 of my prayers, really, for him. It gave him confidence. He's a different child now. And it made him a person who loves to read. We really believe that any child can benefit from Hooked on Phonics.
Call 1-800-ABCDEFG.
This is a News Center 6 D-Day update. More people are turning to News Center 6.
Good morning again, everyone. I'm Bob Mainhart, and we're standing by here in Studio A with our group of D-Day veterans as we're watching the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of D-Day at Normandy at the various locations. And we're between events right now in Normandy. We're going to talk some more to these gentlemen about what they've experienced and looking back on their days. And one guy we're going to talk to now is Charles Barrett. He was an infantryman. And perhaps more interestingly, he was also a prisoner of war. You were taken prisoner during the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, that's right.
Some green troops didn't do what they should have done, and you got caught.
Yeah, got caught, yeah. The Germans attacked the one that cut off the supply line going to Liege, and the only way through is to get through us, so they hit us.
Now, between D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, about a half a year had gone by, so you'd seen a lot of action up to that point.
That's right. We've seen a lot of action.
And when you were captured, it was not, life in a prisoner of war camp was not like what we saw in Hogan's Heroes.
No, it was nothing like Hogan's Heroes. It was altogether different.
It was tough. You were treated as prisoners. Were you treated badly?
Yes. When you lose your liberty, you lost everything. It's an experience that's undescribable.
The Germans were no doubt miffed that they were falling back, and their own country now at this point was being threatened in the war. So they were, I would presume, the guards and the soldiers were taking things personally at that point.
Yes, they were taking it very personally. They were taking that on us. I mean, if anything happened, I mean, they let us well know about it. If our planes came over and bombed and that, they took it out on us.
And for you, that was how you finished the war out as a prisoner of war?
Yes. Yes. I finished the war out of prisoner of war.
All right. I thank you. We're about out of time for this segment. We're going to be coming back here as the morning progresses. We'll be returning to Normandy with more activities. And as we get the opportunities for breaks, we'll be coming back here and talking to these gentlemen some more about their memories of that time 50 years ago, a time that truly was a turning point in history, the history of the world, and also about the events that are transpiring this morning. And we'll be coming back to that in just a little bit. But in a moment, we'll return to Normandy after these messages.
When you contribute to Goodwill Industries, you support work training programs for people with disabilities and other special needs. See what a little Goodwill can do.
Trauma team, ER staff.
Okay, what do we got here? Male, auto accident, hit by a drunk driver. Massive internal injuries, CPR in progress. What's his rhythm?
Flatline.
He's in defib now. Let's shock him.
Everybody, clear.
We can't do any more.
Another life lost to a drunk driver.
Burger and Green. We make drunk drivers pay.
If you have problems falling asleep, now there's Unisom Sleep Gels with a special liquid center. They're maximum strength, as effective as anything you can buy. Unisom Sleep Gels, a remarkable new idea from Unisom.
Fibercon or Metamucil? Both give you the same predictable regularity, the same natural action of fiber. So what makes Fibercon different? With Fibercon, I get my fiber in 2 caplets. FiberCon. Fiber regularity that's easier to take.
WJAC-TV Red Cross Donor Day, Thursday, June 23rd.
Back now, 10 o'clock Eastern Time on a Monday morning, a very special morning where millions around the world look back 50 years at a time when war raged in Europe and in the Pacific. It was a half century ago today when Allied forces stormed the beach to stop the tyranny of Adolf Hitler. Thousands of lives were lost. For those who survived, it is the memories, sometimes painful, which often remain. And the recollection and reflection goes on the beach below us as the international ceremony being hosted by President Francois Mitterrand of France, along with visiting dignitaries, continues here on the beaches of Omaha. And we are sitting atop the bluffs on this Monday morning. We, in this case, being Brian Gumbel, along with Katie Kirk, Tom Brokaw, and Professor Stephen Ambrose, historian, noted D-Day historian, has been joining us, keeping us abreast and regaling us with a number of stories, and we appreciate that.
We are so grateful for his new book because we have been using all of the anecdotes. Plus, I told him earlier that I think that NBC News alone will make him a bestseller, which he
I think that's right.
richly deserves to be.
We mentioned this a little bit earlier, Professor Ambrose, but the conditions today very much like they were 50 years ago.
Well, the sky conditions are, and the wind is about the same, but the surf is way down from what it was 50 years ago. In fact, it's almost a calm sea out there today.
Let's get you caught up on what's been transpiring here. Just a few moments ago, President Clinton joined more than a dozen other world leaders in honoring the thousands of D-Day veterans, both those who served and those who survived and those who gave their lives. Like in most of these ceremonies, there were a number of speeches and a colorful flyover, all part of this international commemorative event.
Earlier today, the president took part in a solemn remembrance off the shores of Normandy and atop the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, where 50 years ago, 225 U.S. Rangers scaled up 120-foot-high rocks as German soldiers fired down on them, honoring those Rangers who died and those who survived as well.
The president then moved on to Utah Beach, where the first American soldiers waded ashore on D-Day. He was joined by French President Francois Mitterrand. The two leaders paid tribute to the U.S. and French troops who stormed the beaches a half-century ago.
For months, families and friends of Allied soldiers watched anxiously as the buildup in England intensified, knowing their loved ones would take part in the invasion of Europe. For one Virginia town whose residents were in the first wave here on Omaha Beach, the news of D-Day confirmed their worst fears, the reality of war. Signed up with Company A of the 116th Infantry and were preparing to fight in the invasion of France.
All their friends was going. We thought that was the thing to do, to be patriotic and what have you. And we were proud of that outfit. I think it was one of the best in the Army at that time.
While training in England, Company A's commander, Captain Taylor Fellers, wrote home frequently about his men.
The boys in the company are doing well. I'm beginning to think it is hard to beat a Bedford boy as a soldier. Out of less than 100 we left there with, I would say that a dozen have made officers, and several more will be soon. I am truly proud to be commended in my hometown as said. Hope I can carry them right through and bring them all home.
For Verona Draper, whose brother Frank was a technical sergeant in A Company, D-Day started out like any other normal day.
I was going to business school in Lynchburg, and my landlady came in that morning. A bunch of us girls were sitting around a breakfast table. And, you know, everybody was worried anyway because they couldn't hear from their loved ones. And she came in all excited that they were having the invasion. Well, several of us girls were not so excited, and we started crying. My mom, she had a dream, and she heard him calling for help. You know, she knew something was wrong.
Letters started to be returned unopened. When the news finally reached Bedford over a month later, Elizabeth Tays was the first one to hear it.
I was a Western Union operator at Green's Drugstore in Bedford. I remember going to work that morning, and I would always cut the teletype machine on, and I would signal to Roanoke, the Western Union Roanoke, that, good morning, go ahead, Bedford. And I recall her teletyping back to me, we have casualties.
I was working in the office at the silk mill, and the telegrams came in, and my friend gave Betty one, and then I saw her go off to pieces, you know.
Betty Wilkes lost her husband, Staff Sergeant John Wilkes.
I guess I was sedated for several days. Then I remember I asked for the papers, and of course in the Bedford paper it was just filled with all the pictures of the boys that had been killed. And I know I said to my sister, well, they just killed them all.
Of the 35 Bedford men who took part in the invasion, 19 were killed on June 6th, another 4 shortly thereafter. Per capita, it was the single biggest D-Day loss for any city or town in the United States. Men like John Wilkes and Frank Draper.
This girl in the office, she just took me home. And my mom, after I saw my mom in bed, I knew. You know, that he was gone.
Men like Captain Taylor Fellers and Earl Parker.
He had a picture of his little girl, little baby. He said, I wouldn't mind dying if I could see my baby. And I said, well, Earl, you'll make it. But I didn't.
The only thing I ever heard was that he was washed back in the channel, and he was never found.
Men like Roy Stevens' twin brother, Ray.
He was pretty close to the cliffs when he got hit. I found his grave. I found his cross with his dog tag on it.
The town was devastated by its losses. Mourners gathered together to share their grief.
When it's a small community like Bedford, and say 19 of them was killed that day, it's too many.
I never could figure it out why we were picked and why so many Bedford lost their lives that day. Must have been destined to go, I don't know.
Today, Bedford is still a small town, even though its population has doubled in the last 50 years to just over 6,000 people. A lot of them never knew about the saddest chapter in Bedford's history, so the local high school is trying to teach them.
You all probably remember Green's Drugstore of that day.
It's a play called Green's Drugstore, which reenacts what happened the day the telegrams came in.
God!
What is it, honey?
Well, it says, the Roanoke operator says, I have casualties.
Their lives were just starting, just as mine is, and they were struck down. And it's scary because they went over there with the hopes and dreams that they were coming back, and they never did.
It's a legacy that this small Virginia town will always have to bear. The day the 19 boys of Bedford, heroes all, lost their lives. Shortly after his death, Taylor Feller's mother wrote a poem about her son that was published in the local paper. It's as moving now as it was then.
Our once happy home where you were all born is lonesome and sad since our boy is gone. God will help us, we know, our sorrow to bear, and be with dear Taylor until we get there. Heartbroken, dead mothers, sisters, and brothers.
Right now, for instance, I can't even find another guy that was with me there. From between the dead and growing old and not wanting to remember.
Go ahead. Hey, you're going to the 50th, of course.
Out of the ocean, all you can see was ships, ships, ships.
I think of the men we lost here. I guess wonder why.
Freedom. And you were born just 2 weeks after I left to come over here to England.
And I go to a ball game when they played a Star-Spangled Banner. I think of my brother John.
AT&T invites you to join us in saluting the true heroes of D-Day and all those who have fought for freedom.
I was getting worried that nobody would know about it, that you wouldn't hear about it.
You like food. You get heartburn. You take Maalox. Life is good.
And don't forget great tasting Maalox tablets, too.
Dum-da-dum-dum-dum. Lovely. What is this? I don't know, but they sure are hungry.
Boy, looks like you could use ortho-diazinon plus.
I could?
Yeah, it easily gets rid of over 100 outdoor insects.
Take that, whatever you are.
Ortho-diazinon plus for beautiful bug-free shrubs, trees, and lawns.
Ah, yes. Another attack thwarted, another azalea saved.
Ortho, you're working too hard without us.
To help you and your dentist keep your permanent teeth permanent, Oral-B introduces the Advantage Plaque Remover. With its power tip and action cup, it's clinically proven to fight gum disease. The new Advantage from Oral-B, the brand more dentists use.
Susan Anderson just did something totally new. It made her feel alive and different. She just took a state-of-the-art shower with new Jergens Refreshing Body Shampoo. This advanced new system combines a dual-textured sponge and a cleanser made with MAP, which, unlike soap, helps skin retain its moisture. Clean. Invigorating. No dry or filmy feeling. So take a state-of-the-art shower with new Jergens Refreshing Body Shampoo for skin that feels fresh and healthy.
We come back at 10:13 to a scene at the American Cemetery here at Colville at Omaha Beach. Some of the veterans of a different generation are wandering around, looking at some of the names on the crosses and remembering about the sacrifice that the men who were buried there gave on this day 50 years ago. Meanwhile, about 1.5 miles away, down below on the beaches of Omaha, the international ceremony is proceeding in Francois Mitterrand. President of France is addressing the assembled visitors. He will be the only dignitary to speak following a photo opportunity. Some will make their way up here for the U.S. ceremony here at the cemetery, and of course we'll cover that live. You know, in a number of American families, both father and son were thrust into war, but for John and Peter Bulkley, that was part of the deal. Both graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, albeit 35 years apart. One of the Navy's most decorated men, Vice Admiral John Bulkley, fought in the Pacific and was awarded the Medal of Honor for his service in the Philippines. He also spearheaded the invasion of Normandy. His son, Captain Peter Bulkley, was engaged in battle off 2 other shores, Vietnam and Kuwait. Admiral John Bulkley, Captain Peter Bulkley, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir.
Thank you both for being with us. Admiral, your orders on D-Day, as I understand them, were to proceed to Normandy without regard for the consequences.
The orders I received from Admiral Hall, who was the commander of the amphibious force, was proceed with the utmost determination, regardless of losses. There's no turning back, no deviation. Proceed with the utmost determination, regardless of losses.
What strikes you most as you recall that day?
The stormy, wet, nasty, cold day.
Even for an old salt, it was a bad day?
I was a salt in the Pacific Ocean there. This is a different ocean here in the Channel.
And it was ugly.
It was bad weather, but not too bad.
You have been here many times since D-Day, I understand.
I came over with my wife and I came with President Reagan, the presidential envoys, to dedicate the opening of the Battle of Normandy Museum in Caen. And it's one of the rated in the French language about 4. Very high, where 5 is the top rating and so forth. And we come over every year, have been, except 1 year here, to lay a wreath here in this cemetery. And also my wife does the unknown graves and so forth, and put graves of robes on each one of those graves, which the soldier buried there is unknown. We do that every year.
That's lovely. Captain Bulkley, am I correct in saying this is your first trip over?
This is my first trip, but it's also probably one where you'll never forget.
What are you struck by?
I'm struck by the dedication of the veterans that are here. It is something that to behold. At the same time, if you look behind us at the beaches that these men came up, the incredible feats of valor and bravery are unmatched. It must have been a terrific battle.
You're a fighting man. You no doubt studied what your dad and others were up against. Now seeing it firsthand, how does it compare to what you expected?
I would say that from my expectations of Desert Storm and Desert Shield, that I was prepared for it. I believe that the degree of difficulty was perhaps quite different than it is right here. But nevertheless, I believe also that the bravery of the men of my generation was also one to be noted, and one where they one day will be veterans just like my dad is today. And they were prepared also, and they just had the same bravery and the same valor. It's an amazing feat that we have great Americans like that.
Admiral, besides, and I say just guardedly, besides just getting the men over here, what was the Navy's role on D-Day as you saw it?
Thank you for asking. I've been asked that by several people and so forth there, but again, don't forget that the Army here and the troops and the soldiers and so forth dominated the entire picture, the entire scene, because they are the ones that are doing the hard fighting, as you can see in this cemetery.
We give them their due, but the Navy had a role.
Now, we had to get the Army over and so forth. Now, the role of the Navy first was to have the minefields, which are right off in this lane here, have 6 lanes swept of mines, as much as you possibly can get them, and then come back to England and so forth and tell them, go, man, go, this is it. You can make it this time here, and with a comparative safety. That was the role of the Navy the first time. And the second role, of course, was in the transports, as landing craft tanks, landing craft ships, and other ships, and also the men of war, and I'm talking about the cruisers and battleships and destroyers, which had to give the gunfire support to the Army. That was the role of the Navy, and a very important role at that time.
He's talking about how the Navy sometimes is overlooked. As a veteran who did not serve in this war, how do other veterans feel about all the attention being given, particularly to D-Day veterans on this day, when those who fought in Korea and Vietnam have their achievements far less celebrated?
That's probably a very difficult question, so I'll try to answer it in my own way. I feel that these veterans are due every bit that we can give as a nation. They are truly heroes. And whether they were decorated or not, anyone who fought here, anyone who fought for America, who fought for freedom, who fought for the liberation of France and Western Europe and a way of life deserves every bit our nation can give, no matter what.
This man beside me has a past that is both glorious and colorful. I read a part of it. You rescued General Douglas MacArthur and his family from Corregidor. You gave John F. Kennedy his start on PT boats. You sunk 2 German corvettes. You defended Guantanamo Naval Base against Castro in '63. Where do your achievements here at Normandy rank on your list of memories?
Not very high.
Really?
This was a military operation. I'm a military man. selected for this specifically here by General Eisenhower, apparently, and also the Navy and so forth. I'll repeat again, my marching order: proceed with the utmost determination regardless of losses.
You had a job to do.
And I had a job to do, and that was all it was.
You did it well. And you are going to be one of the 6 military men who's going to greet the president when he makes his way up here to the
I hear
cemetery.
that, sir.
Admiral John Bulkley, I thank you very much for many things, sir.
Fine, thank you.
I appreciate it. Captain Peter Bulkley? Thank you, sir.
Very great pleasure.
It's my pleasure. We're going to come on back in just a moment. We've got much more ahead from Normandy right after this.
Summer's just about here, but don't panic. If you get on the Ultra Slim Fast plan today, you could lose 10 pounds in a month. The plan's easy. The calories have been counted, the fat grams have been computed. You don't even have to think about nutrition. It's all in there. A shake for breakfast, one for lunch, a sensible dinner, even candy bars as snacks. So start today. By the time the weather heats up, you could look really hot. Ultra Slim Fast. Come on, start today. You could lose 10 pounds in a month.
Can you identify with any of these people? Tom uses an egg timer to limit the length of calls to his mother in Florida. Janice hangs up after getting just half the story. Tad talks extra fast to keep calls to his brother as short as possible. Their crime? They could all talk twice as long as they took advantage of Sprint's new offer. If you'd like to talk longer, turn yourself in. 50% off is the best sentence you can get.
Buick Regal is winning the hearts of Americans who once drove imports. Now they're demanding Buick quality, and they appreciate Regal's unique features like remote keyless entry, dual-zone climate controls, and steering wheel radio controls, a combination of features unavailable on Toyota Camry and Honda Accord. In fact, many former import owners now look overseas, only because they enjoy the view.
This is no ordinary mint mouthwash. This is Cool Mint Listerine. It kills the germs that cause bad breath. It fights plaque above the gum line. It protects you against the early threat of the gum infection, gingivitis. It's more than a mint mouthwash. This is great-tasting Cool Mint Listerine.
Summer's just about here, but don't panic. If you get on the Ultra Slim Fast plan today, you could lose 10 pounds in a month. The plan's easy. The calories have been counted, the fat grams have been computed. You don't even have to think about nutrition. It's all in there. A shake for breakfast, one for lunch, a sensible dinner, even candy bars as snacks. So start today. By the time the weather heats up, you could look really hot. Ultra Slim Fast. Come on, start today. You could lose 10 pounds in a month.
Here at the Riverview Terrace Daycare Center in Tampa, we give our children a loving and caring environment. But in the morning, we watch the Today Show.
On this Monday morning, the international ceremony down below, we understand, is nearing its conclusion. Up here at the cemetery, we've been getting a little bit of a cannonade. I don't know if it's been a 21-gun salute or what.
There's been a fair delay between rounds here, which has surprised me. We've had some unscheduled firing, all of which we were assured are blanks, but we hope that that's the case. The ships offshore have been firing as well.
And some of the people who will be in the assembled audience here when President Clinton makes his remarks are wandering around the cemetery, getting a chance to visit with old friends.
An overwhelming experience, isn't it? And I took photographs for some friends of mine who have relatives in the cemetery, and it really hits home when you see the names of people.
You know, if you go to Hawaii, if you go to Manila, if you go to the places where the battles were fought, not just here in Europe, but throughout the Pacific as well, you come across these graveyards, these cemeteries, it does give you enormous pause and both gratitude and great sorrow, and then in a kind of sense of anger as well that we had to come to this.
At this cemetery, President Clinton will be speaking. We expect within the hour. He is making his way up here even as we speak. We'll have it all for you from Normandy Live after station break.
Someone wants to end this marriage before it begins.
You think I know who's behind the threats?
Will newlywed mean newly dead? Another World, NBC Daytime.
Attention, accident victims. If you have been hurt in an accident, you can talk to an attorney and it won't cost you a penny. Just call Berger and Green now. 1-800-999-2626. Find out about all the cash and benefits you may have coming, about all your rights. Call 1-800-999-2626 right now. The appointment's free and there is no legal fee unless you win. Berger and Green, tough, smart lawyers who get results. 1-800-999-2626.
This is a News Center 6 D-Day update. More people are turning to News Center 6.
Good morning once again. We are continuing our local coverage of the D-Day festivities and commemoration in Normandy this morning with our group of veterans who were there at D-Day. One of the roles in the military and one of the jobs that is very important and one of the things that soldiers hope they never have to call upon but are so thankful when they are there are the medics. And one of the medics are with us here this morning. He is Bill Barkhammer, and you were in very early on, Bill. The marching orders early on D-Day, the official orders were the wounded are to fend for themselves. If you're able-bodied, you're to be going forward. So initially, at least, the medic's job was very minimal, but very quickly on, you folks got very, very busy. Just tell me a little bit about what it was like in the first hours and days at Normandy.
Well, the first hours was, there were a lot of wounded on the beaches. And we had to go around. There was digging trenches to bury the dead. And if we found one dead, we just took his helmet off and laid it on him or something to identify him. But the wounded, we had so many wounded, and our job was to get into Karatam, the armored division, but they needed us on the beach. So we ran around on the beach helping the ones that was wounded and calling litter barriers in to get them off the beach.
You told me a story about one of the toughest things for you was if you found a man who had died in combat, it was opening his wallet to see who he is and seeing pictures of the family, and that's really when it brought home to you the horror of war.
Yes, very much so. It's something that I was never able to cry, that I cried. You had to cry to relieve yourself. And when you've seen pictures of these loved ones enjoying their home life and that, then to see them dead, it's a sad thing.
And knowing that that's what you were there fighting for.
Yes, yes.
All right. Gentlemen, we'll continue with this discussion as time permits. We want to let you know that President Clinton will be speaking at the American Cemetery. That's the main ceremony of the day, and that'll be coming up very shortly, and we'll be covering that live. As we get the opportunity to take more local breaks here as the morning progresses, we'll do so. And if not, we'll be keeping you up to date on all the D-Day festivities throughout the day on News Center 6. We'll be back in a little bit later.
A serious accident can change your life forever. And when you're seriously injured, you may be overwhelmed by the problems you face. I'm attorney Edgar Snyder. At my law firm, we understand these problems, and our goal is to make it easy for you to get the legal help you need. That's why we have an office here in Johnstown on Bloomfield Street. And if you can't come to us, we'll come to you. So if you're hurt in an accident, call my law firm first for a free evaluation of your claim.
Call attorney Edgar Snyder, 266-7710. 266-7710.
Who makes the freshest springtime salad? You do. Try our delicious new Oriental sesame on your fresh cucumbers, and you've created the freshest salad of the season. Good seasons. You make it fresh. You make it best.
Looking for a different way to spice up dinner? Take a new look at cheese. Think of cheese as a zesty way to perk up your chicken, or cheese as a tangy topping for tastier fries. Awesome!
American food, I do with cheese.
The moon is rising. The passion is growing. The animal is out. Nicholson. Pfeiffer.
scared.
Wolf. Rated R. At theaters June 17th.
Local vets share D-Day memories all morning on News Center 6 Live.
Back now, 10:30 on this very special Monday morning, June the 6th, 1994, D-Day plus 50 years. And we are doing extended coverage of events here at Normandy, and commemorative ceremonies marking the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And along with Tom Brokaw and Katie Couric, I'm Brian Gumbel. You're getting a shot from Arlington National Cemetery, where actor Charles Durning is addressing the crowd. He himself a veteran of D-Day.
It was a complete and total commitment to the vision of the leadership of this nation. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Charles Durning, and I am a World War II veteran.
We welcome you once again to the site of the Normandy Invasion.
As we look at the commemoration of this, the 50th anniversary of World War II, our thrust this morning is pay attention to the efforts of those people at home. The home front actions to support and sustain the soldier on the front lines was as important then as it is now. Through these trying times, the thread of calm was provided by music. I invite you to listen now as the United States Army Band, Pershing's Own, with their leader and commander, Colonel L. Brian Shelburne, and the Army Chorale, present a number of pieces of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Blues under the direction of Chief Warrant Officer Michael M. Walker.
We come back atop the bluffs here at Omaha Beach in Normandy, France. Brian Gumbel along with Katie Couric and Tom Brokaw. The morning proceeding very nicely. The ceremony is broken up down below, and now we await the national ceremony. It's going to get started here.
That Navy Admiral you talked to, Bryant, in our last half hour was really an amazing guy. What a character.
It's an amazing family, Katie. I mean, I don't mean to, let me see if I can find this. You think Peter Bulkley had a chance but to be in the Navy? Get this one. Peter's great-great-grandfather, Lieutenant Charles Bulkley, had been second in command of the Bonhomme Richard in 1779. His great-grandfather, Richard Bulkley, had been a midshipman with Lord Horatio Nelson, HMS Victory in 1805. His grandfather, Frederick, was also in the Navy, and of course his dad, who was a Medal of Honor winner. You think he had any choice?
You know, those kinds of traditions are dying out, unfortunately, because there were that great long line, the long gray line or the long naval tradition line, or later, of course, the people who were going into the Air Force, because we had 2 world wars in fairly rapid succession. Sure. So there was a whole different sense about the place of military in our lives. And then Vietnam came along, and it changed so many opinions and so many attitudes about the place of military, including those who were professionals. And there probably will be a restoration now of some military pride as a result of this, as there ought to be, as we are living through different times.
Plus the Gulf War helped that out as well.
I think it did help.
To know, since we're talking to those great that great naval team, that many vets here regret that all World War II veterans are not being honored today. Again, they feel, I think,
you were making the point earlier about the guys in the Pacific.
That's right, and that many of that, they feel that they should be recognized as well. Obviously, this is their day, but I think their thoughts are with some of those who sacrificed in places like Tarawa.
Good point. We've got a lot more to get to here in Normandy, and again, we can tell you that the national ceremony will be getting underway, and we, of course, will be covering it. But right now, let's get back to New York for a look at the rest of the day's news. Matt Lauer is on duty at the news desk. Matt?
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Good morning again, everyone.